So other than hairdressers and the obvious one we know about in this area about construction workers going over to Quebec, doesn't seem to work both ways, but going over to Quebec, what are the other barriers for people getting up, moving to another province and practicing their profession, their trade, what have you?
Well, you know, one of the things we mention in the paper is that the barriers to economic freedom in Canada are so great and so pervasive that no one has been able to come up with a complete list of them. I mean, even people who have devoted considerable time to it have thrown their hands up at the complexity of the various rules about professions and dairy industries and transport and agriculture in almost every field you care to name. As soon as you want to carry on your business, your profession across a provincial boundary, you encounter significant regulatory and legal barriers. Now, the issue for a lot of people is, well, you know, in their particular profession, perhaps they don't move, or perhaps they've only moved once, and, you know, they've kind of absorbed those costs. What we're trying to get people to think about is not the small individual cost that they encounter each time they meet one of these barriers, but the cost to the country as a whole of the loss caused by all of these barriers and obstacles together. And we find that the experts who've looked at this have estimated that this could be worth as much as half a percentage point. I think we...
That's kind of a medium-low estimate.
Medium-low estimate is 1/2 percentage point of growth in GDP annually, which is a huge amount of wealth that Canada is losing every year. And Canada is also losing international prestige and international authority in trade negotiations because we're busy internationally protecting, for instance, rules about the dairy industry, which which are interprovincial barriers to trade, which the rest of the world regards as quite illegitimate. So we're not only paying an internal cost, we're also paying a cost in terms of our ability to negotiate international trade agreements, and all of these things cumulatively have a big effect on the Canadian economy. Bob, you've got some...
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with barriers to trade and mobility and all the rest is that they're basically invisible, and if you happen to be a Canadian businessman or person and you want to do business there and you run into a barrier, most businessmen will just, their business people will just say, okay, well, I'll work around it, which might be expensive, I'll ignore it, I'll go elsewhere. So the fact that I think the point that I've found over the time that the agreement on internal trade has been in place is that it still doesn't solve the problems because the remedy is too complicated. In other words, you can't go someplace and say, okay, you have this barrier, let's remove it. It takes you months, if not years, in order to resolve some of the issues, and sometimes they're never resolved because the province just decides that they're not going to take it away. So it's something that is invisible, and we don't know how much it costs, but it's there for all of us in one way or another. And mind you, if you stay, even if you stay in one place in one province, you probably may not know that there's a product there that is sold in say Ontario that you can't get in Quebec. In fact, there's a butter blend that includes canola oil that you can get in Ontario. Gay Lee makes it, but Gay Lee can't sell that in Ontario.
In Quebec?
In Quebec, I beg your pardon. I hate to use the dairy industry because everyone knows that it's rife with all sorts of barriers, as in many other places in agriculture. Just one other, the labor mobility issue is getting better because the governments have come up with a revised chapter just this past year, which is based on mutual recognition, and it should solve some of the problems, but it still has the basic problems that the whole agreement has, is that if you run into a problem, you can't solve it because there isn't a mechanism to do it.
Susan? Go ahead.
One more quick one, or somebody else?
We'll have time for another round. Susan, go ahead.
Can you just tell us for fun, if you do know, how our interprovincial trade barriers compare to Europe or to Canada, U.S.? For example, is it easier for a business to trade with the United States, or is it easier for France and Britain to trade?
Well, I'll just observe, you didn't ask for this comparison, but it's the one that I like the best, and we'll come to the other ones you asked about. In Australia, Australia realized that it was a small economy in a rapidly globalizing world, that it couldn't afford the kinds of barriers that they had in their country, similar to what we have here. And the Australian states went to the federal government in Australia and said, we need to get rid of these barriers to have an efficient national economy if we're to meet the challenge of globalization. Only you, national government of Australia, can fix this problem. So the states recognized that they themselves didn't have what it needs, what one needs in order to solve this problem, and they basically twisted the arm of the federal government to resolve it. John or Bob, sorry, do you want to?
I've been trying to deal with that particular question, particularly in relation to the United States for 20 years odd. And I still can't quite get that, figure out if that's an urban myth or what. The only thing you can say for sure is that if you want to trade with the United States, you're sure of the rules, right? They're all written down. If you want to trade, if you want to move a product into BC from Ontario, you aren't sure of the rules, and you can't solve them. So there probably are some business people who would rather do business in the United States because it's clearer and easier than it is in Canada. Besides, the market's bigger. So,
John, as a PhD in American history, will tell you that the new American Constitution was put in place in part to solve this very problem.
Yeah, the original American experience, the Articles of Confederation, one of the nightmares was the extent of protectionism, and the Constitution as enacted in 1789 took dead aim at that. And the Constitution of the United States, like ours, gives power over internal trade and commerce to the federal government. And their courts have been very consistent of what they call the Dormant Commerce Clause. That is, the federal government has the power to do this. If it doesn't do it, the power is dormant. The states can't pick it up. And American courts, including the Supreme Court, have been very explicit. Measures whose main aim is protectionist by state governments and by cities do not withstand judicial scrutiny. The other thing I'd like to say is to do with the point about uncertainty. You know, one of the problems, sometimes economists quantify a bit too much, and they say, well, we could figure out this adds 3 cents to that, 4 cents to that. Uncertainty kills economic dynamism. It depresses people's hopes. In fact, we quote John Maynard Keynes in our eclectic approach here. Keynes said, you know, businesses aren't really actuated by precise calculations. It's animal spirits. It's a sense of optimism. And when you have this feeling that the rules are shifting and unfair, dispute resolution is obscure and complicated, it really just makes you say, what the heck, why bother? And that is one of those things that poses a huge cost. It's interesting in terms of restrictions on professions. I noticed sardonically that they never put them on the press, because if we were interfered with in our attempt to move from province to province, we'd complain. But just like everybody else, we are being nibbled to death by ducks. You know, all these little things are taking away money from us and causing us problems. They affect our employers. That affects our employers' ability to pay us more money, which is a bad thing. We say, I'm bored with interprovincial trade barriers. I want to go drink beer. But you go into a beer store where what determines the selection on the shelves? Who gets to say? And all these little things that take away your ability just to buy and sell and interact and invent things and do stuff with your fellow citizens that you might otherwise want to do. And all of it is so pointless. There are policies that impose costs but give you benefits, and you have to try and lower the costs and increase the benefits. But these barriers, they just make us poorer and more hostile, and there's simply no gain to it. And therefore, why doesn't the federal government get rid of them and move on to other things?
One quick follow-up, just again, there are people who say that the strong central government died with Pierre Trudeau. And are you guys actually arguing for the return of Trudeau's idea of the country?
Well, I mean, we certainly don't want to invoke any one person's name, because, you bring a lot of baggage when you do that. We are certainly here to make the argument that in 1867, when Canada was created, part of the scheme was very clearly the tearing down of the barriers that separated what were then the different colonies, that there's simply no disputing that that what was created in 1867, the one new thing was a new set of institutions, a parliament and a government in Ottawa with the power to create a nation, and that tearing down the barriers between citizens is a vital part of that nation building, and we have not been living up to the legacy that's been left to us. That's the argument that we want to make.